Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the much anticipated Topsky F7X FPV goggles. So, Topsky have actually been making goggles for a few years now, but not FPV goggles. I think they originally made cinema style goggles for media consumption, which is basically what the competing Fatsharks were designed around. So, they have a lot of experience when it comes to goggles, but not a lot of experience when it comes to FPV, and I think this will possibly be their downfall. So on paper, the F7Xs are set to take Fatshark off the top of the compact goggles chart, but in reality, I'm sad to say that is not the case. Now, people give Fatshark a lot of grief, including myself, because of their prices, and also they've got many flaws, but the fact is that in my opinion, the Aomway Commanders so far are the only other compact style goggle that have come close for the money. So, looking at the specs, we do have higher resolution 1280 by 720p screens that are actually HD, and the advert on the website says that they switch between 4:3 and 16:9 aspect ratios, which was a big selling point for me, but I'm sad to say I can't find any setting or any button that does that, so they actually seem to be stuck in a 16:9 aspect ratio, but they do retain a large field of view of 42 degrees, which does match the current Fatshark flagships, which are the HD3s. So here is a quick comparison of the F7Xs and the HD3s. Now, I know some people will say that analog video transmits in a standard definition format anyway, so what is the point in going up in resolution? And you could have a point. All I will say, though, is I have a 4K monitor on my computer, and plugging in a external 5.8 receiver to it produces an image so clear that it puts any goggles to shame. So I do think that it makes a difference personally, and this model also has HDMI input, but more on that later. So then we have some other features such as a inductive power switch that turns off the screens automatically when your head isn't near them. But these goggles also come with a 5.8 GHz receiver module, which is compatible with the Fatshark module. So if you buy the HD3s, for example, you don't get any modules with that. But yeah, a bit more on the modules later with this goggle. And they also come with a antenna, which is right-hand polarized. There's also a fan on the top to stop the lenses fogging up, and they also accept diopters, but sadly they seem to be a bigger size than the Fatshark standard diopters, which do kind of fit, but they're going to fall out if I'm not careful, and I'm probably going to scratch the screens with them as well, so I don't recommend using these. So I guess Topsky are going to come out with their own diopters at some point. So as for the price, they are around the £260 mark, but I will link them in the below because the prices are always changing. They do sit at a similar price to the Aomways, which is important to know because I think these are going to struggle to compete with them. But before I get onto that, let's take a look at what you get in the package. So everything comes in this nice pouch, and it's bigger than the Fatshark pouch. This could be seen as a good or bad thing. I think it's a good thing, so I can fit more bits and bobs in there. We have the goggles, of course, and straight away I can't say I'm a fan of the colour scheme. They are a bit garish, and the red isn't quite as shiny as the pictures shown on the website either, so I guess those were just renders. So this black cover on the front is removable, but it's quite difficult to get off, and it's very susceptible to fingerprints. We have a few clips around the edge, and you you have to be really careful not to snap anything. It really does feel like something's going to break when I'm removing it. And then underneath that we have two further covers on each side. One is for the receiver module with a couple of holes for different antennas, and the other one is for accessing the micro SD card slot for the built-in DVR, which takes up to a 32GB card against the Fatshark's 64GB capacity. And then we have a potential slot for a head tracking unit there as well. So you can access the SD card from outside of the red covers, but you will have to remove the black cover to get to it, which is a bit of a pain. I can see myself leaving the black cover off, which does leave some of the electronics exposed through this air vent on the front here. There also doesn't seem to be another way to access the files through a USB cable, for example, so you're going to have to remove the microSD card to get the recorded footage off it. So the SD card slot on the Fatsharks is between the nose of the goggles, which I always personally liked, and on this model instead we have a inductive power switch in its place, which is a bit like the reverse of the sensor on your phone in that it turns the screens off when it's not close to your face to save on battery power. And this feature could prove to be quite useful for me because I'm always leaving my Fatsharks plugged in by mistake, although if for some reason this feature malfunctions, then it could mean that the screens go blank while I'm flying, which is not good. So time will tell whether it will become an issue or not, but for me it seems to be working, except for when I'm trying to film down the screens for you guys. These screens keep turning off. Now, the goggles come with the strap detached, so you'll have to fit that yourself. It's just a Velcro strap and a loop that ties around the slots in the goggles, and the strap is adjustable and it's quite comfortable. So, also in the box we have the instruction manual, which is in fairly broken English, but it covers everything quite well, and it's also in a couple of parts for some reason, and then we have a card advertising Topsky's social media, etc. Now, the 5.8 receiver module comes wrapped in its own box, and it does not have diversity. It supports 40 channels, and you might notice that the pins are reversed compared to other Fatshark modules, and the electronics are also on the back of the module rather than the front to make it slimline, which means that the fit of the module, while is quite efficient, it's more tighter and takes up less space. And this is why I think these goggles are going to struggle to compete, among other things. You see, Fatsharks are far from perfect, but because they've been around for a while, the fit of these modules, whether it's a 1.3 GHz module or a chunky diversity module, it's now based around them fitting Fatsharks, and I think this is potentially a mistake that Topsky have made. Whether that's an intentional mistake to stop any lawsuits, I don't know, or maybe it's so they can have the black cover fitting on the front for aesthetics, but the fact is, if you want to use any of the current aftermarket modules, then you'll have to put them in upside down, and with the fit being tighter than the Fatsharks, the majority of aftermarket diversity modules aren't going to have enough space to fit. And if the module has an LCD on it, then the screen will be upside down and the black cover or the red covers won't fit over the top of them unless the module is really slimline. Now, I have the original Fatshark antenna diversity module here, and it does fit in the space quite nicely, but as I say, none of the covers fit over the top of it, and none of the search buttons work with it either, so I'm stuck with just the one channel, which is no good really. So either we need some modules created specifically for these goggles, or some 3D printed parts to allow a better fit, and maybe some firmware to flip the screens on the diversity modules, etc. You see, these are all obstacles currently stopping these goggles being at the top. and beating the Fatsharks or the Aomways in my opinion, because diversity's become a big thing recently. And yeah, goggles like the Attitudes have a similar issue with these modules fitting, but what I'm saying is that it's going to take a change in design for all of these peripheries that people have come used to, which enhance these type of goggles, and I don't see that happening just to fit these. But I do think Topsky are going to come out with their own diversity module as well, but that will be at more cost, of course. So moving on, and we have a 90-degree right-hand polarized cloverleaf antenna, which is RPSMA to match the included module. Then we have the 2S 2200 mAh battery, which doesn't have a balance lead coming out of it. My best guess would be that it has a balance circuit inside and it charges off the DC connector. There's also a power indicator on the side of it, and the lead to the battery is quite long, and that's because the DC connector is on the underside of these goggles, but the Fatshark batteries will still reach and work, so that's pretty good. So then we have the charger, which I guess you could say is proprietary, seeing as there are no balance cables for the battery. And we also have a HDMI lead and a couple of adapters for it, which is going to be nice because there's all sorts of different HDMI sizes. Then we have an AV splitter lead, which is very similar to what you get with the Fatsharks, and we have this foam surround as well that doesn't seem to be adhesive. Instead, we have these slots that line up with the rubber faceplate, and then you're given these straps to tie it on with. Again, the Fatshark style faceplate has become a standard, which is why Aomway and Ishin have adapted it. So personally, I'm not a fan of this in general. This rubber faceplate keeps coming off. I think it doesn't quite fit right, and because it's flexible, it just sort of works its way out of the eye cups. The rubber can get quite sweaty as well, which is why I guess they have included this foam, but I think an adhesive Velcro would have been better, which you could mod, I guess, but the entire rubber faceplate isn't good in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, when it's in place and on your face it works well, and it's actually quite comfortable and good at keeping the light out, but the fact is that it keeps coming apart when not on my face, and I'm finding that annoying. Again, this is just my initial reaction of trying on these goggles, and I've become used to the foam Fatshark style faceplates, which I also didn't like at first. I mean, they're not perfect either. They act as like a giant sponge when it comes to sweat, which isn't very hygienic, but I think I prefer them to this rubber plate here. And you're actually given a wipe cloth in the package, which is probably for cleaning the lenses, but maybe I can use it for wiping the sweat off this faceplate here. So let's take a look around the rest of the goggles, starting off with the top, and we have a very similar layout to the Fatsharks. So we have two buttons for going up and down the 40 channels of the receiver, and the frequency is displayed on the screen, and it goes away after a couple of seconds of not pressing the buttons as well. Now the channels are displayed in order of frequency and not bands, which is not a big deal, but it means you have to go through all 40 channels individually. And then if you long press either two of these buttons, then the goggles will do an auto search until it finds the correct channel. One thing I've noticed though is that the search is really slow. It seems to go through all of the channels individually to analyze them for the strongest signal, which is fine, but yeah, it takes a long time for it to do that. So on the other side we have the volume control, and this is for if you've got the headphones connected to the headphone jack, so there's no built-in speaker or anything like that. And there doesn't seem to be a head tracker button like on the Fatshark, so I'm going to assume that it's always in use when the module's connected. I personally don't have anything with a head tracker, so I'm not able to test it. Then we have the mode button, which selects between AV 2D, AV 3D, and then HDMI 2D and HDMI 3D, just like the Fatsharks and the Aomways. There's nothing different there. And then if you move the mode button to the top or the bottom, a menu will pop up allowing you to change the brightness, contrast, colour and language, which is either just Chinese or English, by the way. So over to the other side, and we have the DVR controls. The DVR will only work in the AV modes, so not the HDMI modes. The DVR works a bit like the Aomways in that you have to enter a recording mode first. So it's a long back press of the DVR button, and then you'll get a record icon showing on the screen, and then it's another backwards press to start the recording, and you'll get the record icon flashing on the screen until you start the recording, and that's another back press of that button. Again, I prefer the Fatshark method of a flashing light in the center of the goggles rather than it being on the screen, but that's a small thing. You can also take a photo here by short pressing the button to the side, but I can't see why you'd want to do that. So here is where I found a big downside to these goggles. Now you need to remember that I have an early version of this product here, and when I reviewed the Aomways, they weren't quite the same as the fully released version. So the DVR does not record anything when the camera source is NTSC. I've done multiple tests and tries of this, and the file always ends up being 0 kilobytes. Now, I can see a picture on the screen, but it just doesn't record anything. But to make things worse, if your copter's camera is NTSC, then it is appearing in the goggles, but it also crops a huge amount of the screen off the bottom as well, just like the Eachine EV100s did. But PAL seems to be okay, but for some other reason the DVR is recording at half speed. So I did a 5-minute flight and the file came out at 11 minutes long. The DVR has also cropped off a lot of the bottom of the image as well, despite it looking okay through the screens and the source being PAL. So another problem is the image seems to shimmer up and down, and the quality is quite blurred and unclear compared to the Fatsharks. It records in a MJPEG AVI format with a resolution of 1280 by 720p, which is higher than the Fatsharks, and it also records with a bitrate of 24 megabit at 25 frames per second, but I would say that this has been upscaled because the quality just isn't there compared to the Fatsharks. There is one good thing about the DVR recording half speed, I guess. If you double the speed, you get 50 frames per second, but this is the only positive I'm able to take away from this DVR, which is pretty disappointing. So from here, you can also press the DVR button down for a second, and that will switch to video playback mode and picture playback. You can use the left and right buttons to select through the videos, and a top button press to play or pause the selected video. Anyways, onto the underneath of the goggles, and we have the AV port. And when the RX is turned off via the switch over the other side, then the socket acts as a AV in port, but sadly when the RX is turned on, it does not seem to act as a AV out, which is a shame. So next to that we have the DC port for the battery, so there's no on and off switch with these goggles. They turn on as soon as you plug in the battery, and we should get 3 hours out of it according to the manual. And of course if you move your face away from the goggles then the screens turn off, but the RX doesn't turn off, so that's still powering up and draining the battery. Now the goggles will beep when the power gets low, just like the Fatsharks do. So above that we have the PS2 interface for a head tracker, and then we have the IPD adjustment, which is for differently spaced eyes. And I'm getting a really clear picture with them both out to the max because I've got quite a wide face, and I don't see any blurriness at all using diopters, and in fact the image is quite clear without the diopters, which is unusual for this type of goggle, but it is improved with the diopters for sure. Anyway, despite these screens being 720p, I don't think the image is as clear as the Aomways or the Fatsharks. I'm not talking about clear as in blurriness, I just mean clarity of the picture in general. Now, don't get me wrong, they're quite usable, but it almost feels like they've been hacked to show an FPV feed rather than designed specifically for FPV. Almost like some kind of processing is happening over the top of the picture to get it to be there, and it's not a direct feed. That being said, I can't notice any latency while flying at all, but I do seem to have a bit of dirt on one of the screens, which is quite annoying. Again, these are an early version, but I have to mention it because that's how I've received them. There's a little speck on the left screen, and I think this system is sealed, but yeah, I'm going to have to take it apart to see if I can clean that away at some point. Now, there's also some kind of slight reflection going on in the goggles as well. I can see slight ghosting of the image in other parts of the screen. I think these screens are DLP because when I move my eyes from left to right quickly, I can see a rainbow effect, which is something that you get with DLP projectors, and some people are more susceptible to seeing the rainbow effect than others, but I've never seen it through a goggle before. But yeah, I'm definitely going to have to take these apart to see if I can get rid of the little speck of dirt, because stuff like that just really annoys me, and I've not seen that on one of these compact goggles before. So taking a closer look at these goggles, and the lenses seem to be a completely different solution as I suspected. I think they are DLP. So if I turn them on, we've got various lenses there, and they seem to be projecting from the top, and we've got sort of mirrors around here as well, and I think that's where the ghosting is coming from. You definitely see a double image, and I think it's reflections from the fact that it's being projected in a different way. Anyway, moving on, and in the middle of the goggle we have an on and off switch for the built-in fan. And finally we have the HDMI in and an earphone jack. Now, the HDMI only seems to accept a 1280 by 720p input. When I tried a 1080p input, I got a scrambled image, and I also got a scrambled image from plugging my Phantom 4 into it as well, so it seems like it requires a really specific input. Again, I think these goggles were designed for watching movies through them, which they do very well. I've had a great picture plugging them into the computer and setting it at 720p, and the picture is crystal clear like that. But I think it's safe to say that for FPV, these goggles have got a long way to go, and I'm hoping that somehow updates will be released and can be installed, maybe through the SD card, I don't know. As for the FPV performance while I'm flying, it's okay. I can fly with it. I use the Micro Sparrow camera here, which is a 16:9 camera, and it didn't perform as well as it did on the Fatsharks. It wasn't as clear. But anyway, there you go. That is my review of the Topsky F7X FPV goggles. I don't think they're a Fatshark killer, and I think the Aomway Commanders are a better deal for the money. But if you still want to buy a pair, I'll put a link in the description, and I'm going to leave you with some flying. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
Turn around, I feel the breeze over me. You watch your dreams unfold. Let it come around and let it breathe over me. It's time to go away into the light. I feel the calming energy. I see the darkness coming. It's the unknown, the unknown. It's time to go away into the light. I feel the calming energy. I see the darkness coming. I see the darkness coming, and I'm calling you to help me set me free. I'm calling for you. I'm calling for you. Oh,